Have you ever had to forget someone you were supposed to be grateful to for the rest of your life? Oren, 17, only son of a millionaire, grew up wrapped in luxury. But the one who taught him how to love, how to cry, how to be human, was just an old nanny named Alba, and then she vanished. No goodbyes. No one in the family ever spoke her name again. 5 years later, at a lavish birthday party, Oren stood before the crowd and spoke a truth that shook his entire family to the core. Because some debts can't be paid with money, they must be paid with gratitude. Don't look away. This is where the story begins. Beneath a night sky shimmering like a symphony of light, Oren Varel's 17th birthday unfolded like a living testament to the power and polish of the elite. Calem's crest, the hilltop estate perched proudly on the city's western edge, was draped in silk-soft lights, reflected in champagne flutes, designer gowns, and the crystal smiles of high society. The guest list sparkled with fame. Politicians, best-selling authors, a Cannes-winning director, and viral influencers with millions of followers. They weren't here out of affection, but out of interest in the name Varel. Oren, ash-brown hair neatly trimmed, clad in a black silk shirt and a tailored Italian suit, moved through the crowd like an actor too weary of his leading role. He smiled because he had to, not because he wanted to. Compliments echoed like an old, overplayed recording. So mature. The spitting image of Mr. Calem, next in line already, as if his life had been programmed in advance. From the central stage, Leontine, Oren's mother, the queen of couture, emerged like royalty. Raising her champagne glass, her voice rang out like a director calling cues at a fashion show. We're incredibly proud of Oren, our only son, whom we love more than words can say. And she glanced toward Calem, the cold-eyed man, holding the mic. We've prepared something very special for him tonight. The LED screen behind them lit up, a highlight reel titled 17 Years of Growth. Baby Oren, his first steps, violin lessons, boarding school farewells, polished to perfection, like a brand campaign. And not a single glimpse of Alba Rosario, the nanny who'd raised him since birth, who read him stories through sleepless nights, who kissed his forehead every morning, until the day she vanished, as if she never existed. Oren swallowed hard. He'd asked his mother 3 times to invite Alba, just to sit in the very back row, but Leontine had brushed it off with the ease of flicking lint off a cuff. Darling, some things are meant to stay in the past. When the video reached his 11th birthday, a moment he remembered clearly, Alba's hand still clasping his as he blew out the candles, but the clip had been edited to erase her completely. He couldn't take it anymore. Oren stepped onto the stage. No one stopped him. No one saw it coming. He took the mic from his father without asking. Silence fell. Under the glittering chandeliers, Oren stared straight into the camera as if speaking. To every soul behind the glitz and glass, thank you for the birthday gift, Mom. Dad. He paused. It's just, the most important person in my life isn't in that video. Because she didn't match the party's aesthetic? A stir swept through the room. Glasses clinked quietly. Calem's hand tightened slightly. She wasn't a stylist, or a mentor, or a CEO. She was the one who held me for 5 hours straight when I had a fever, who told me bedtime stories about flying dolphins, who cleaned up my skinned knees when no one else was home. Oren turned to face his parents, but she was erased. From the video. From your memories. Because she didn't fit the image of a perfect family? Leontine froze. Caleb took a step forward, but Oren's gaze stopped him. Steady, not angry, just resolute. The kind of disappointment that had matured into detachment. I don't need a highlight reel. I need the presence of someone who actually lived it with me. He placed the microphone down. Gently, the soft thud rang loud in the grandeur of the room. A single, off-key note, shattering a well-rehearsed symphony. He walked off the stage. No one dared to call him back. Not because he was wrong, but because no one dared admit he was right. And in that moment, amid the awkward applause, the expensive wine, the glittering gowns, the only thing that truly existed was the quiet, deliberate footsteps of a 17-year-old boy, no longer searching for approval, but rewriting the story of what family means. Oren's room sat on the top floor of Caleb's crest, completely detached from the dazzling world below. It was so quiet, you could hear the clock ticking, each second carving deeper into his chest. After his outburst downstairs, Oren had bolted straight to his room, locked the door, and shrugged off his jacket like shedding a second skin that had never quite fit. The distant hum of the party still floated up from below, muted like echoes from another planet. He crossed the room to a low wooden cabinet, the only piece of furniture unchanged since he was 6. Kneeling down, he opened the bottom drawer and pulled out an old wooden box, darkened with age. The lid was slightly warped, the hinges loose, but inside was a world only he understood. There were handwritten notes in soft, slanted script, inked in pale violet. Eat your soybean soup, and don't skip the veggies. I know you always push the carrots aside. Tucked beside the letter was a scribbly drawing. Oren and Alba reading beneath a tree, the sun smiling down from a corner of the page. A small beige cloth doll, frayed at the arms, rested among birthday cards that were never sent. A folded slip of paper, still faintly smelling of peppermint tea, had been written 4 years ago. If you're sad today, I'll tell you the story of the flying dolphin again. I remember your eyes when you asked me, can I save someone? If I really love them? Oren swallowed hard, fingers trembling as he brushed over each keepsake like touching the spirit of someone long gone. Every slip of paper was a thread pulling the past into the present, tightening around his heart. He rose and walked to his bookshelf, flipping around a photo that had faced the wall ever since Alba disappeared. The housekeepers always turned it upright while cleaning, and every time, Oren silently turned it back. In the photo, a woman with warm brown skin, gray-streaked hair pinned neatly behind her head, and eyes full of quiet patience held a 5-year-old boy in her arms, smiling like she could shield him from the world. Oren gently ran his fingers over the photo, then picked up his phone. He dialed an old number, one he knew better than some family members' real names. The FaceTime icon pulsed, then ended. No signal, no reply. He opened the voice recorder and hit record. If you saw what I did today, please don't be mad. I just wanted people to remember you the way I do. He hesitated, then added, voice faltering, did you know, at my birthday party, they played videos, showed pictures, and you weren't in any of them. Like you never existed. But to me, you're the only one who is real. He turned off the phone and placed the box back into the drawer, but this time he didn't shut it. He left the lid slightly open, like his heart had been cracked wide with no reason to hide it anymore. He sat down on the floor, eyes lingering on the photograph still facing the wall. In the soft glow of the desk lamp, the rest of the room faded, and that picture stood out, sharp and vivid, like a wound left untouched, because no one had dared to heal it. And that night, for the first time in months, he fell asleep without locking the door. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains as if nothing had broken. Caleb's crest returned to its polished elegance, housekeepers moving silently, the head chef preparing breakfast, soft classical music drifting from the ceiling. Speakers. But in the second-floor room where Orrin had just awakened from a night of near sleeplessness, nothing felt intact. He sat at the edge of his bed, dark circles under his eyes, staring at the wooden box still slightly open in the corner. The emotions from the night before hadn't faded. Instead, they had sharpened into something new. Cold, precise, like a thin blade. He could no longer be a bystander. Not after what had happened. Not after those letters. Not after the call that was never answered. Orrin pulled on a plain shirt, nothing like the silk armor from the night before, and stepped out of his room, his footsteps soundless on the polished, wooden floor. Since he was little, he'd learned how to eavesdrop, not out of mischief, but because in this house the truth always hid behind closed doors. He walked toward the library, what his father liked to call the second brain. A dark paneled room, its walls lined with leather-bound books, and at the center, a massive desk equipped with an intercom system that connected to every room in the estate. As a child, Orrin had once toyed with that system, plugging in the headset, to catch snippets from the kitchen or hear the butler chatting at the front gate. He never imagined he'd use it for something that actually mattered. But this time, he opened the cabinet, rummaged for the old headset his father had banned 3 years ago, and plugged it into the audio port. He wasn't sure what he'd hear, but he needed to know. He had to know. A small click sounded. Then, after a few seconds of silence, his mother's voice, Leontine's, weary and hurried, broke through the static. "Do you realize the tabloids have started asking questions? They're wondering why the old nanny vanished right before we announced the new estate holdings." Then came Caleb's voice, dry and stony as sandpaper. "She didn't fit the image we're trying to build. Class, race, background. Nothing. Aligned." Orrin held his breath. His blood turned to ice. "She didn't ask for money," his mother said, her voice catching. "She only wanted to say goodbye to Orrin, and you wouldn't let her." A long pause. Then Caleb answered, slow and deliberate. He was too young to remember, and if he does, he should learn to forget what isn't necessary. Orrin shot to his feet, yanked out the headset, eyes wide like something had sliced straight through him. The stately wall in front of him suddenly looked warped, distorted like a painting drawn with the wrong lines. It wasn't that Alba chose to leave. It wasn't old age. It wasn't illness. She had been erased, cut from his life because she didn't fit into the grand narrative of a perfect, upper-class family. She was written out like a line deleted from a speech meant for prime-time television. A storm of rage and grief twisted in Aaron's chest. But there were no tears this time. Only a piercing clarity that burned colder than pain. She had begged to say goodbye. Just one word. And they had silenced her, snuffed out that last flicker of voice to protect their public image. He no longer wanted to hide behind the glossy wooden doors. The truth was too clear now to keep. Pretending, Orrin turned and strode out of the library. But before closing the door, he glanced back into the space where his father always sat, with a glass of red wine and his laptop beside him. "It's not that she didn't fit the image of this family," Orrin whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "It's that this family never deserved her." The door closed with barely a sound, but inside Orrin, another door had swung open, and it would never close again. Nights at Calem's Crest were always cold, not because of the wind, but because of the silence. A solemn, measured silence, as if the mansion itself never allowed anyone to be truly alive. Every glance, every footstep had to stay in character. But tonight, someone broke the rules. After uncovering the truth hidden behind closed doors, Orrin couldn't rest. He couldn't let those words, "She didn't fit the family image," be the final chapter for someone who had once held him every night, taught him his first letters, and loved him quietly, like he was her own grandchild. She had asked for a goodbye. They had denied her. Now, Orrin would be the one to say it, through action. The clock had just struck 2 a.m. The house slept on. The hallways stretched like a maze, nightlights casting broken shadows behind him. Dressed in a dark hoodie and soft-soled sneakers, Orrin moved carefully, as if each sound could wake an entire kingdom. He returned to his room and opened the third drawer. Not for clothes, but for the old map Alba had once sent, folded in with a letter after she left. The paper was worn, its edges creased, the handwriting neat and round, like every word had been written with a heartbeat. Orrin tucked the map into an old canvas bag, along with a wooden box of keepsakes. He crept downstairs and opened the first-floor window, the only one in the house without an alarm. It was the same window Alba used to unlock years ago, sneaking him out to stargaze on sleepless nights. A cold breeze rushed in. But inside, something lit up. A fire sparked to life in his chest. He pulled out his phone and searched the old contacts saved under Mr. D, old guard, the gray-haired driver who used to take him to bookstores, drive Alba to the clinic, and sneak him ice cream when sweets were off limits. The phone rang. Orrin barely breathed. Then a low, raspy voice answered. Surprised, cautious. "Orrin?" He swallowed hard. "You said you'd always help if I needed it. I need to see Alba." A pause. Then the low rumble of an engine. 10 minutes. Back corner of the yard. Orrin ended the call. His heart pounded like a drum. 10 minutes later, an old gray-brown pickup truck rolled slowly onto the wet grass behind the estate. No headlights, just the soft crunch of gravel under its tires. Orrin climbed into the back seat, breathing hard. Not from exhaustion, but from a quiet, gnawing fear that if he waited even one more day, it might be too late. Mr. Dempsey, well into his 60s, sun-worn face and steel-sharp eyes, glanced at Orrin in the rearview mirror. "Last time I saw her, she still called you her little angel." Her eyes lit up, like nothing in the world had ever hurt her. Orrin looked out the window, the lights of Calem's Crest shrinking behind them. "I don't know if she still remembers me, but I've never forgotten her." The truck drove off into the night. No alarms, no witnesses, no goodbyes. But for Orrin, it was a real farewell. A goodbye to a world that had chosen to erase the one thing that ever truly mattered. On his lap, the old wooden box trembled with every bump in the road, like his heart beating in time with the wheels. And in his mind, one quiet question lingered. Would she forgive him for not coming sooner? Ahead was darkness. Behind him, a past that had been twisted and rewritten. But inside Orrin, A promise began to take shape, one never spoken aloud. That he would find the woman who once saw him as her whole world, and this time he wouldn't let anyone erase her again. The truck rolled slowly past the pines surrounding Calem's crest, as if feeling its way along the fragile edge between a world that had just collapsed and one not yet fully formed. Inside the dim cabin, only the soft flicker of the dashboard. Lights lit the face of a 12-year-old boy in the back seat, Oren Varel, who had just shed the title of Millionaire's son to begin the journey of becoming himself. He hadn't spoken since getting in. Mr. Dempsey, the aging driver, didn't push. They understood each other in silence, a rare luxury in a house where every word had to be measured to fit the image. Oren leaned his head against the window, feeling each tremble of the vehicle like the shaky breath of his own body. In his hands was the old wooden box, the only thing he brought besides the map and a change of clothes. With every soft jolt, the box creaked faintly, as if whispering memories back to life. The winding road curved down the east side of the estate, through a small patch of forest, where, years ago, Alba had taken Oren stargazing for the first time. She'd told him then, "Some of the most beautiful things only appear when you step away from artificial light." He hadn't fully understood, but now he was living that truth. Behind him, the lights from his birthday party still flickered, through the trees. Perhaps they were still toasting champagne, still talking stock prices and the Varel name in glossy financial magazines. No one knew that, on this quiet night, the family's only heir was leaving. No one ran after him. No one asked where he was going. No voice from the balcony. No hand reaching out. Oren glanced back one last time. Through the misted window, the mansion's silhouette faded like a mirage, dissolving into the dark. There was no bitterness in his eyes, only a deep, familiar loneliness, one that had grown beside him like a shadow. He whispered, more to the night than to himself, "I used to think home was where someone waited for you, but no one ever waited there." As the truck turned off the main drive, passing through the rear gate, Oren saw the familiar stone statue, the founder of the Varel line, holding a scepter, gazing into the distance with prideful arrogance. The headlights stretched its shadow, long beneath the tires, until it disappeared. A chapter of history closing without anyone left to write the next line. Mr. Dempsey kept the truck steady. Every bump in the road made Aaron tighten his grip on the box in his lap. Inside were letters, drawings, a cloth doll, and a piece of Alba Rosario's soul. To him, the box wasn't just memory. It was living proof of a love his family had tried to erase like a PR mistake. Dawn began to bloom at the horizon. Shades of rose and lavender wove through the sky like silk, tearing through the night with a strange gentleness. Oren looked up, eyes beginning to sting. Not from sadness, but because, for the first time in years, he felt light. He reached into his canvas bag and pulled out the old map. Shaky lines drawn by aging hands with detailed turns and little notations. Stores Alba had once passed by. In the corner, there was a message in Spanish. La familia no siempre es de sangre, es de corazón. Family isn't always by blood, it's by heart. Oren read it silently. He wasn't fluent in Spanish, but Alba had taught him that phrase one summer. Back then, he'd asked, "What if I have two hearts?" She laughed. "One is to live, one is to love. Just don't let them both fall asleep at the same time." He smiled, pressing the paper gently, like holding an entire summer in his hands. The truck rolled on, leaving the heights of wealth behind, turning onto the main boulevard. Office buildings, billboards, and streetlights slid past the windows, like frames in a slow-moving film. But this time, Oren didn't feel out of place. He was heading somewhere someone might truly remember him. He leaned back, still holding the box close, and thought, "She gave me love, the one thing money can't buy. Now, I'm bringing it back to her. No GPS, no guide, just a map, a few pieces of memory, and a heart still beating for something good." The city deepened around them. The windows fogged slightly from the breath of a long night. Oren traced a shape onto the glass with his finger. A circle, two curved lines beneath, a smiling face with round eyes like Alba's. Morning wind drifted through the cracked window, carrying the scent of damp grass and fresh light. He felt the chill, but he didn't feel alone. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, sleep came. Not under the watch of security cameras, but in an old truck, beside a grown-up who kept his word. And in his dream, Alba sat in the back seat. She said nothing, just rested a hand on his shoulder, her eyes like the morning sun. Warm and real. The sun had just risen over the edge of the city as Mr. Dempsey's old truck rolled into the Bronx. Compared to the cold, hushed luxury of the neighborhood Oren had grown up in, this place felt like another world. Loud, chaotic, alive, and unfiltered. Graffiti-covered walls, tangled wires crisscrossing tiny balconies, the blare of car horns, vendors shouting, children laughing. It all fused into a raw rhythm of life so real, Oren gripped the strap of his bag just to steady himself. He stared out the window, taking in every detail. A tiny corner bakery, an old man scattering corn for pigeons beside a crumbling church, a young woman pushing a stroller over cracked pavement. No one here wore masks. No one was trying to look like something. They were just trying to live, or trying to be real. Mr. Dempsey pulled up to a small gray apartment building, 3 stories, rusted iron balconies, and the faint smell of garbage drifting from bins in the alley behind. The house number, 218, hung crooked on a loose nail, like someone had bumped it and no one bothered to fix it. He turned off the engine and looked back at Oren. "You sure about this?" he asked softly. Not out of doubt, but because he knew. The first encounter was always the hardest. Oren nodded, though his hands trembled as they clutched the wooden box. He stepped out, his legs almost giving way when he looked up at the rusted staircase leading to the 3rd floor. Each step hit, like a drumbeat in his chest, pounding with invisible weight. What if she didn't recognize him? What if she was angry? What if she had forgotten? He stopped in front of door 3B, paint peeling, one corner taped with old masking tape. He took a deep breath and knocked 3 times. Footsteps, slow and hesitant, shuffled inside. A lock clicked, then the door creaked open, just a sliver, and a familiar face appeared, older, thinner, but with that same gentle spark in the eyes Oren had never seen in anyone else. Alba Rosario. The woman with silver hair pulled into a low bun, wearing a worn gray sweater and holding a kitchen towel in one hand. Her brown eyes were tired, heavy with years and medication, but when they landed on Oren, she didn't recognize him right away. She squinted, studying him for a long second. "Paper deliveries early today," she said hoarsely, as if it had been a long time since anyone spoke to her this early in the morning. Oren opened his mouth, but his throat locked up. He couldn't say her name, couldn't say, "It's me." Instead, he held out the wooden box. She looked down, froze. For a moment, it was as if something electric jolted across her face. Her fingers trembled as they touched the lid, running over the worn scratches, marks she herself had carved when Oren was 7 and insisted on writing Alba into his memories. Then she looked up. "Oren, is that you?" Her voice cracked, dry like a brittle branch breaking in the wind. He nodded, lips quivering. "I'm sorry it took me so long to find you." She didn't need another word. Alba opened the door, wide. She opened her arms, and Oren fell into them like a 6-year-old again, the way he had the first day of school, when kids made him cry and she held him like holding her whole world. Her body trembled against his. "I thought they'd taught you to forget me." "No one could teach me that," Oren whispered, eyes blurred with tears. There, in the creaky hallway of a third-floor Bronx apartment, inside the cramped space of a modest home, the reunion unfolded. Not glamorous, no music, no flowers, but with the force of a lightning strike on what seemed like an ordinary day. They held each other for a long time. Neither asked what the other had been through. They didn't have to, because loneliness doesn't need to be explained. It only needs to be held. If you've ever had someone who once loved you quietly, then vanished from your life, what would you do if you saw them again, years later? Share your thoughts in the comments and stay with us for the next chapter in Oren's journey, his reunion with the woman the world tried to forget, but he never did. Alba's arms were still warm around Oren's shoulders as she fully opened the door and welcomed him into the small apartment where she had spent the forgotten years. The metal lock clicked behind them, cutting off the world outside, the chaos of the Bronx and the cold elegance of Calem's crest alike. Oren stepped inside, quietly overwhelmed. Everything about the apartment felt old, cramped, but there was a warmth here he had never known in his family's mansion. The tiny living dining space was barely larger than his mother's dressing room, yet every detail bore Alba's touch. A folding chair beside the window, a hand-knit blanket draped neatly, and a crayon drawing from his childhood, framed imperfectly, in cheap plastic, off-center but filled with love. Alba gestured for him to sit. "I'll make some tea. Just rest, sweetheart." Oren watched in silence. She moved into the kitchen, just a few steps away, and started to boil water. When she turned to get the cups, he noticed her hand tremble, just slightly, but enough that he couldn't look away. When she pulled a handkerchief from her pocket to wipe her hands, he caught a glimpse of faded red on the edge. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. Alba turned back, quickly tucking the cloth away. "Just old bones acting up. A little cold, nothing serious." "I saw the blood on the handkerchief." She paused for a beat, then gave a faint smile. "If I said I was fine, would you believe me?" Oren shook his head. No. They sat in silence. He stood and stepped into the kitchen. It was half the size of his family's guest bathroom, barely enough room to turn around. He saw an old pot on the stove, a chipped white kettle, and the fridge humming softly beside them. He opened it, almost empty. A single egg, a nearly expired carton of milk, an unfinished bottle of antibiotics. On top of the fridge, a stack of bills taped loosely together, electricity, water, hospital notices. One bore a red stamp, final notice. Oren turned around. "How long have you been living like this?" Alba didn't answer right away. She dropped a tea bag into a cup, placed it on the table with deliberate care, long enough to stop counting the days. Oren walked closer. He looked down at her hands, thin skin, short nails, rough as sandpaper. These were the hands that once carried him, spoon-fed him soup. Now they looked like fallen leaves in late autumn. "You wanted to say goodbye to me, didn't you?" he asked. She looked up. Her eyes glazed over slightly. "Yes, but they said I wasn't allowed. Said it would confuse you. Make it harder for you." Oren clenched his fists. "You didn't make anything harder. They did. They hurt you. They hurt me." Alba sat down, meeting his gaze. Her voice was soft but steady. "I never wanted to leave. But sometimes, love isn't allowed to exist in the wrong place. It wasn't you who was wrong." Oren's voice cracked. "They were. The world they built was. There are worlds made of marble walls and crystal chandeliers," she murmured. "But they melt the moment real love walks through the gate." They fell silent again. Oren took a long breath, as if trying to swallow everything that still ached in his chest. "Did you know? My father had someone tail me," he said suddenly. "I overheard him on the old intercom system. He called you a public relations problem. Said you didn't match their image, that they stopped you from saying goodbye just to save face in front of investors." Alba didn't look surprised, but she nodded slowly, her gaze falling. "I thought, if I stayed away long enough, they'd let you remember me. But I was wrong." Oren moved even closer now. He wasn't the boy behind the glass anymore. He was the only person standing between her past and present. "You don't need to disappear. You deserve to be seen, and I won't let them erase you again." Neither said another word, but right then, in that tiny kitchen, a promise was made, without vows, without declarations, sealed in eye contact and a single hand laid gently over another. The room remained still. But within that stillness, something stirred back to life. Not what had been lost, but the right to be loved without asking permission. They sat together in that little kitchen, like two weary souls who had finally found each other again after a long, hard storm. Through the small window, morning light poured in, casting warm beams across the table and highlighting every crack in the old plaster walls, every layer of peeling paint, every fragile line of age on the apartment and on their hearts. Oren didn't speak again, but he stood up, walked over to the sink and rolled up his sleeves. "I'm staying," he said with a conviction stronger than when he'd left Calem's Crest. "At least a few days. You need help, and I need to learn." Alba paused, a soft, sad smile curling on her lips. "Learn what, Oren? There's nothing here for you." "There's everything I never knew," he said, looking at her, so sincere she couldn't say no. At first, she shook her head. Her expression carried the instinctive resistance of someone long used to enduring alone, rejecting help, rejecting need, rejecting the idea of being a burden. But when Oren stumbled over the edge of the tablecloth, knocking over a bowl of cold soup, then scrambled to clean it up, fumbling between paper towels and dish rags, she laughed, a real laugh, full and bright, echoing through the tiny kitchen. "All right," she sighed, picking up a rag, "but you have to follow directions." Oren nodded enthusiastically. "I'll do everything right, even though I've never made instant noodles. Then we start with something simple. Lentil soup." Alba opened the cupboard, pulling out a bag of dried lentils and a few carrots. "It's the first thing I ever made for you when you were a baby. And the one you used to call hug soup, Oren laughed. That sounds exactly like something I'd say. She taught him everything, how to soak the lentils, chop vegetables, and keep the water at just the right boil. He treated every step like a sacred ritual. His hands were clumsy, gripping the knife as if afraid it might hurt the carrots. He sliced them too thin, spilled the whole bowl of rinsed beans as he tried to carry it to the stove. People back home would lose their minds if they saw this, Oren muttered after dropping the spoon for the third time. No one loses their mind here, Alba replied gently. Just someone who picks it up and hands it back. He smiled, for the first time in years, feeling like no one was judging him. Finally, the pot was on the stove. Oren watched the flame, stirred carefully, and set a timer just like she'd shown him. But minutes later, the scent of burning filled the air. He jumped, pulled off the lid, and found the bottom blackened, the soup thick and sticky like glue. "No way," he cried. "I followed the steps exactly." "You used the highest heat, didn't you?" Alba asked, coming over. "I thought it'd cook faster." Alba said nothing for a moment. Then she let out a breath, took the pot off the stove, and ladled some into a bowl. She handed him a spoon. "Taste it." He did, and winced. "Burnt. Definitely burnt." She chuckled. "But this time, you cooked it with your own hands, and with your own heart." Oren laughed, too, a laugh tinged with tears. In the bitter, scorched flavor on his tongue, he felt something strange. This was the first meal he would remember every second of making. "Grandma," he said softly, taking her hand in his. "You did this every day, all those years, just for me?" "No," Alba replied. "I did it because I loved you, and I knew that one day, if you still held that love, you'd come back." A tear slipped from Oren's cheek and fell into the spoon. The little kitchen was filled with the scent of burnt soup, but in the heart of the boy who once had everything, this was the first time he'd ever truly cooked something greater than a meal, something made of mistakes, of trying again, and of love. That night, the Bronx went to sleep early. The distant wail of an ambulance echoed from the far end of the street, mingling with a baby's cries from the apartment below. Just another layer of sound in a neighborhood where life always fought to keep moving. But inside apartment 3B, beneath the soft glow of a table lamp casting long shadows on the wall, a different kind of life was beginning again. Slowly, gently, like someone stitching up an old tear in a well-worn coat. Oren sat at the small wooden table by the window, the wooden box still open beside him. The amber light illuminated old letters, crayon drawings, and bent birthday cards he had once scrawled as a child, each one glowing like rediscovered treasure. He picked them up one by one, like shells along the shore, reading the handwritten stories she had once given him. "Oren, today I'll take you to the bookstore. There's a story about a flying elephant you liked so much. Do you remember the first time we went to the park? You ran too fast and tripped over a tree root. I almost cried." Among the papers, a hand-drawn sheet slipped loose. He picked it up, a map, scribbled in waxy crayon. Clumsy lines shaped a house, a sun, and a giant heart right in the middle. "This," Oren whispered, "is the map we drew together." On the left, it read, "Corner bookstore with the fat cat." On the right, "Park bench, where the pigeons are, but shh, don't scare them." In the center, "Cookie shop, where Grandma snuck you treats before dinner." Each label, each doodle lit up a memory inside him. He looked around. Alba had fallen asleep, her head tilted gently on the armchair, an open book resting on her chest. The golden light brushed her hair, now fully silver, every strand like thread mending a past that had once unraveled. He turned back to the table, pulled out a blank sheet, and picked up a pencil. He began to draw the map again, this time with a steadier hand, bigger lines, more deliberate shapes, but the heart still stayed in the middle. He wrote out each place: the small park on 4th Avenue, the red stone church at 23rd Mr. Mateo's bookstore, the bus stop where Alba once waited with him for the rain to pass. Each point, each street connected by arrows, dotted lines, a journey he wanted to walk again, not to reclaim childhood, but to say thank you. He told himself, tomorrow I'll take her to each place, not to relive the past, but to honor it. A breeze slipped through the window pane. The old map floated up and landed gently on his knee, like a quiet hello from long ago. He placed the two maps side by side, one old, one new, one drawn with a carefree child's hand, the other with the quiet resolve of a boy learning how to grow up. But both had one thing in common: the heart, always in the center. Oren wrote a final line at the bottom of the new map. Wherever she is, that's where home is. Then he folded it, tucking it gently into the wooden box, like placing a young, fragile hope back where it could be safe. He lay back on the small sofa, pulling a thin blanket across his stomach. Outside the window, the city still buzzed, but inside him, something had settled. Quiet, warm. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from something, and no one was pulling him in a direction he didn't choose. He was heading home, and he knew he was on the right path. Evening had settled by the time Aaron penned the final line on his new map. He folded it carefully and placed it inside the wooden box. Outside the window, the streetlights had just flickered on. Bronx nights carried a damp, golden glow, thick, with the scent of worn-out pavement and something real. Not far off, a bus honked. Footsteps hurried past on the sidewalk below. A TV played faintly from the apartment next door. Oren stood and exhaled. After a day heavy with feeling, arriving here, digging through memories, redrawing a map, his heart felt both empty and full, like an old jar filled with water again for the first time in years. From the kitchen, Alba was slicing bread. Her worn gray sweater hung over one shoulder. Her hands still moved with their old grace, though slower now. A new pot of soup, this time made entirely by her, simmered softly, its scent gently spreading through the apartment. It wasn't the fragrance of gourmet cuisine, nor the polish of a recipe perfected for show. It was the smell of something real, the smell of a home. "Wash your hands, Oren," she called gently. "Dinner's ready." He nodded, stepped to the sink, and splashed cool water onto his face. In the fogged-up mirror, he caught a glimpse of himself. Hair slightly messy, fingers stained faintly with crayon from the map. But his eyes, they looked unfamiliar in the best way, unburdened and calm. Dinner was set on a small round table by the window. The two chairs didn't match. One was an old wooden chair with a broken armrest, the other a folding canvas seat. The lamp had been propped up on a stack of books for height, casting a dim amber glow over two steaming bowls of soup, a few slices of toasted bread, and a small dish of pink salt. No silver cutlery, no monogrammed napkins. But on the table, two hands found each other, one calloused, the other still soft, both holding on to something they'd once lost. Oren took a deep breath. The scent of lentils, pepper, and basil filled the air. He picked up his spoon and tasted a bite. The soup was balanced, neither too salty nor sweet, but there was something else. Something unnamed, felt only through the heart. He set the spoon down, paused a moment, then said softly, "I've never had a meal that tasted this good." Alba, chewing a piece of bread, stilled. She looked at him, and in her gaze, something, long, empty, quietly filled. "Because it's the first time," she said gently. "You're not eating alone." Oren lowered his eyes, lips trembling. All those past dinners, seated at a 12-person table, miles of silence between each chair. His mother scrolling through her phone, his father signing contracts between bites. Every dish plated like a work of art, yet no one ever asked how he was. And now, with one bowl of soup and a single lamp, he felt full in a way he hadn't in years. "When I was little," Oren murmured, "I asked you once if a meal could make someone happy." "And what did I say?" Alba asked. "You said, it's not the meal, it's who eats with you." Alba smiled. "Glad you still remember?" "I remember everything," Oren said, eyes glassy. "And I'll remember it for the rest of my life." They continued eating in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because nothing more needed to be said. The soft clink of spoon against bowl, the quiet rhythm of Alba's breathing, and the warmth between them was enough. Oren knew. There was no dessert sweeter than knowing you're no longer alone. He leaned back, letting the light fall across his shoulders, fingers brushing the rough wood of the table. He thought of his father, his mother, of the birthday party, the fireworks, the champagne, of the golden-lit kitchen back at the mansion, and realized he had never truly lived. He had only ever performed. But here, in this old kitchen, in the heart of noisy Bronx, beside a woman the world tried to forget, he was finally living, and he was loved. That night, the Bronx fell asleep early. The distant wail of an ambulance echoed from the far end of the block, blending with a baby's cry from the apartment downstairs, the daily symphony of a neighborhood that had to fight just to keep going. But inside apartment 3B, where the soft light of a desk lamp cast long shadows on the wall, another kind of life was quietly starting over, slowly, gently, like someone stitching up an old tear in a beloved coat. Oren sat at the small wooden table by the window, the wooden box still open beside him. The amber glow lit up the old letters, crayon drawings, and bent birthday cards he had once scribbled long ago, each one glowing like buried treasure finally unearthed. He picked through the pieces like seashells on a quiet shore, reading the handwritten notes Alba had once left him. "Oren, today I'll take you to the bookstore. There's that story about the flying elephant you liked. Do you remember our first trip to the park? You ran too fast and tripped over a tree root. I almost cried." Among the pile, a hand-drawn sheet slipped out. He picked it up, map, clumsily drawn in waxy crayon. Rough, childlike lines made up a house, a sun, and a giant heart right in the center. "This," Oren whispered. "This is the map we drew together." On the left, corner bookstore with the fat cat. On the right, park bench with the pigeon nest. Grandma said be quiet there. In the middle, cookie shop, where she snuck me treats before dinner. Each label, each tiny drawing sparked to life in his memory. He looked up. Alba was asleep now, her head tilted gently to the side in her armchair, a book resting open on her chest. The soft light touched her hair. Now, completely silver, each strand looked like thread, sewing together a past that had once unraveled. He turned back to the table, pulled out a blank sheet, and took a pencil. Slowly, he began to draw the map again, this time with a steadier hand, bolder strokes. But the heart stayed in the middle. He wrote each place. Small park on 4th Avenue, Redstone Church on 23rd, Mr. Mateo's bookstore. The bus stop where Alba once waited for the rain to stop with him. Each spot, each street connected by arrows and dotted lines, a journey he wanted to walk again, not to relive his childhood, but to say thank you. He told himself, tomorrow I'll take her to every one of these places. Not to go back, but to give thanks. A soft breeze slipped through the window. The old map floated gently and landed on his knee like a quiet greeting from the past. He placed the two maps side by side, one old, one new. One drawn by a carefree child, the other by a boy quietly learning how to grow up. But both had the heart at the center. Oren wrote one last line beneath the new map. Wherever she is, that's home. Then he folded it up gently, like placing a fragile hope inside the wooden box. He lay back on the small sofa, pulled a thin blanket over his waist. Outside, the city still buzzed, but inside him, something had stilled, something warm and quiet. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from anything, and no one was dragging him anywhere. He was going home, and he knew he was headed the right way. The kitchen still held the faint scent of leftover soup as the morning passed, quiet as the ticking of the clock on the wall. Alba was hand-washing an old embroidered towel in a small basin near the balcony. Oren sat nearby, adjusting the map. He'd drawn the night before, preparing for their first memory walk. Outside, the Bronx bathed in soft sunlight. It seemed like a peaceful morning, but something in the air felt off. Alba's gaze drifted down to the alley below, where a man in a gray coat leaned against a light pole staring up at the 3rd floor. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't on his phone. He just stood there, waiting. A survivor's intuition, sharpened from years of living beneath the gaze of the wealthy, made her brow tighten. The doorbell rang. Short but deliberate, Oren stood, signaling, "I'll get it." But before he could reach the door, the bell rang again. Longer this time, like someone on the other side was trying to cut through the silence. He peeked through the peephole and froze. Calum. Leontine. Standing stiff and cold, like stone statues, at the threshold of a world they never thought they'd have to enter. The hallway's fluorescent light spilled over their shoulders, casting long shadows onto Alba's door, like ghosts from the past demanding a place in the present. Alba approached. Oren turned to her, whispering, "It's them." She stopped. Didn't ask who. Didn't ask why. She just stood still, like someone watching an old nightmare return, not with knives but with silence and stares that had never been answered. The door opened. The scent of expensive perfume overpowered the lingering smell of lentils and mint lemon. Polished shoes stepped onto cracked tile. Calum entered first, eyes sweeping the apartment like he was sizing up a C-grade boardroom. Leontine followed slowly, her gaze falling on the stack of letters on the table, the memory map, the childhood, photo of Oren on the wall, until it landed on Alba's worn slippers beside the rug. "Oren," Calum said first, cold, precise. "We heard you were here." Oren stood in the middle of the room. He didn't invite them in, but he didn't block the doorway either. He just stood there, like a gatekeeper between two worlds, the past and the present. "Who told you?" His voice was flat, steady. Caleb didn't answer, but Leontine hesitated. "We were just worried about you." "Worried enough to hire someone to follow me?" Oren's smile was bitter. Alba said nothing. She stood behind Oren, but each word dropped like stones against her chest. Leontine looked at her for the first time in years, with an expression hard to name. Not hatred, not guilt, something closer to bewilderment, at the existence of someone she once tried to erase, like a smudged line on a family resume. "We didn't expect to find her here," Caleb said at last. "She left. She was supposed to stay gone." Oren exploded. "She didn't leave. She was forced to disappear. She just wanted to say goodbye, and you took that from her." Silence. Caleb stepped back, half a step. For the first time, Alba still didn't speak. But she placed a hand on Aaron's shoulder, soft but strong. It said, "I'm here, and I'm not afraid anymore." Leontine's eyes lingered on the photo on the wall. Her voice trembled. "Back then, I was afraid too." Oren turned to her. "Afraid of what, Mom? Afraid I might love someone like her more than I loved you?" No one answered. The apartment felt like it might burst, not from yelling, not from slamming doors, but from the weight of everything that had never been spoken. And still, no one screamed, no one cried. Only the quiet collision of truths long, buried. Then, finally, Caleb spoke, without the voice of a CEO or a father. "How long do you plan to stay here?" Oren met his gaze. "Until I learn how to love someone, without needing money to do it." The door remained open, but no one moved. Now, the distance between them wasn't measured in steps, but in years that could never be undone. And inside, that third-floor apartment, three worlds, power, love, and choice, collided not with a bang, but with the unwavering weight of a stare that refused to look away. A light rain had just passed, leaving a misty haze across the window pane. As Alba cleared Aaron's bowl, the heavy knock from the day before echoed again in her mind. Now, Caleb and Leontine sat at the cramped dining table. A scene neither had ever imagined. Mismatched chairs, peeling paint, a dim yellow light casting shadows on a wall marked by the fingerprints of a child once loved here. Oren remained standing, leaning against the corner cabinet, like a silent observer. But his hands were clenched, as if trying to tear through the thick air pressed between the three of them. Alba set the last empty bowl on the counter. She didn't sit, but she spoke, her voice not cold, not forgiving, just steady, the way she'd once spoken to Oren as a child. Slow, clear, not needing to shout to be heard. "I never thought I'd see the two of you again. Not in this kitchen." Caleb glanced around. The room was too small for him to dodge the weight of it. He placed a hand on the table, fingers tapping out a slow, uncertain rhythm. "We're not here to fight," he said. "We came because of Oren." Oren's lips curled. "I've been there the whole time. 12 years, and not once did I feel like you ever came for me." The room dropped a degree colder. Leontine folded her hands into her lap, lips trembling. That wasn't an accusation. It was a truth too naked to deny. Caleb looked at Oren, for the first time directly. No armor in his eyes. "I wasn't good at it. Wasn't enough. I thought if I gave you everything, you'd never need anything." Alba walked slowly to the table, poured herself a glass of water, then sat across from the man who once signed her out of the life of the child she had loved most. "Money doesn't buy habits," she said. "I used to hope Orrin would ask, 'What are we having today, Grandma?' every morning. But one day, I was replaced by timers and personal assistants." Caleb exhaled, his shoulders sagging like a building whose foundation had cracked. "I never had a father to learn from. All I knew was how to construct an image. I honestly don't know how to love." Orrin stepped forward, still holding the center of his chest like bracing himself against his own heartbeat. Then what was I? A branding project? A return on investment? Leontine broke. "No, Orrin, you were. You are everything I didn't dare face." I was jealous of Alba, because I knew she understood you more deeply than I ever allowed myself to try. Silence. Outside, the rain had stopped. A breeze slipped in through the window, carrying the scent of damp grass and early cold. Alba rose, placed a hand on Orrin's shoulder. "You should get some rest, sweetheart. We've got that park trip tomorrow. Remember?" Orrin nodded and slowly stepped into the other room. He didn't look back. Caleb and Leontine stood as well. But just before leaving, Leontine's gaze caught something on the table and froze. Beside Alba's untouched glass of water was a piece of paper. She had started to write a letter, but only got one line down. "If one day I'm no longer here." They didn't dare read the rest, not because there wasn't time, but because they knew. If they did, they'd have to face something money could never buy. Regret. What do you think is harder to say? "I love you," or "I was wrong"? If you've ever wished someone would apologize with their whole heart, leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video, because in the next chapter, a man who's always used money to speak will have to learn how to call someone's name with respect. The next morning, the rain had eased. The Bronx looked strangely clean, like the storm had rinsed not just the dust from the streets, but the lingering traces of unnamed memories clinging to the rusted balcony rails on the third floor. Alba woke early. She was still tired, but her eyes were clearer than the night before. Orrin sat at the edge of the bed, holding the map he'd marked with the first 3 stops of their memory journey. They would start at Mr. Mateo's tiny bookshop. But that trip never happened. As Orrin folded the map, the doorbell rang. This time, there was no urgency, no power behind the knock. Just a single chime, soft, like someone gently asking to come in at dawn. Alba opened the door. Caleb stood there, alone. No Leontine, no bodyguards, no assistants, no tailored suit. Just a man in a faded gray trench coat, holding a folder in his hands. He stood silent for a few seconds. "I was hoping to speak with you. Alone." Alba hesitated. Orrin looked at her, waiting for a cue. She gave a slight nod. "Why don't you step outside for a minute, sweetheart?" Orrin stepped onto the balcony. He didn't take his eyes off the barely opened living room door, half closed, half open, like the conversation about to unfold. Caleb sat down. Alba didn't offer, but she didn't stop him either. No tea was poured, no small talk, just truth. Bare, trembling, and overdue. He opened his bag and placed a thin medical file gently on the table. "I contacted the hospital. They said your condition is still operable, if treated during this window." Alba didn't touch the folder. She sat upright, hands resting on a folded handkerchief in her lap. "You came to compensate me?" she asked, not bitter, just as if asking about the weather. Caleb met her eyes, and something in her gaze, something that wasn't anger or blame, made him pause. "I came. Because I don't know what else to do. I can't undo time. I can't unsign what I signed. But at the very least, I can give back part of what you lost." Alba quietly opened a drawer beside her and pulled out an old postcard, its edges crumpled, the paper yellowed with time. The writing was in a child's clumsy scrawl, overflowing with affection. "Dear Grandma Alba, it's my birthday, and I'm really sad you're not here, but I'll save you a slice of cake if you come back." Below that, a neater line in Alba's handwriting. "To my Oren, may you always have the courage to love, even when no one teaches you how." She set the card on the table, in front of Caleb. "Do you know when that was written?" He picked it up, read it, and for the first time his hands shook. The date was Oren's birthday, exactly 1 week after Alba had been forced to leave. "Never mailed it," she said quietly, "because I knew if I did, Oren would think I still hoped to return." Silence fell. "You have every right to hate me," Caleb said, "but I truly want you to live, so Oren can finally say thank you for what he never got to say." Alba looked at him for a long time. Then she spoke, gently, but with more weight than anything else that had ever been spoken in that kitchen. "I don't want money, I just want to hear you call me by my name, as a person." Caleb looked up, and in that moment, the man who once sat front row at global economic summits bowed his head to a woman in a third-floor apartment. Not out of defeat, but because she was right. "Alba," he said softly, like learning how to say something he'd once thought unimportant. "I'm sorry." Leontine stepped inside, holding the old knitted scarf Alba had made for Oren when he was 9. She froze at the threshold, hearing those words. Then, without saying a thing, she sat beside Oren on the balcony, and for the first time, took her son's hand. Oren didn't turn around, but he gripped her hand back. Inside, Alba remained upright, but her eyes were misting. Read a debt had just been repaid, not with money, not with insurance, but with the hardest currency of all in any human bond, recognition. After that morning, not much was said. The unfinished letter still sat on the table, its corner flipped up by the breeze. Alba rested in her room. Caleb had left early, his footsteps so heavy the entire hallway seemed to hold its breath as he passed. Only Oren and Leontine remained, sitting by the window, where the late afternoon light slanted in, gilding the edges of the worn curtain with gold. "You've made up your mind?" Leontine asked, her voice as soft as if she were asking about the weather. "Yes," Oren replied without hesitation. "I want to stay, at least, until she gets better." The air settled into a quiet pause. Oren didn't look at his mother. He was afraid he'd see disappointment. But Leontine wasn't angry. She simply nodded, gently, slowly, and, for the first time, he felt her agreement came from her heart, not out of duty. "When you were little," she said, her eyes drifting off, "every time your father went on business trips, you'd pull out Alba's photo album and ask, 'Mom, do you miss her?' I used to think, maybe you were just pretending. But today, I realize, you never forgot her." Oren turned to her. For the first time, the space between them didn't feel like a void. Leontine stepped forward. She opened her arms, Not stiff like before, but soft, trembling slightly, as if offering an apology she didn't know how to say aloud. Oren hesitated for a moment, then embraced her. And in that embrace there was no triumph. Just something that had never existed before. A sense of family, awkward, but real. From the doorway, Alba stood watching. She didn't interrupt, she wasn't envious, she simply smiled, quietly. Before leaving, Caleb returned one last time. He stood at the threshold, resting a hand on the wooden door frame as if he wanted to say something, but didn't. No apology, no instructions. Just a long look into Oren's eyes. And for the first time, he nodded. Just a small nod. But it was the one Oren had waited 12 years to see. Not, "You did well, but I understand now." The door closed. Quietly. Oren remained in the kitchen alone, the last of the evening light spilling across the cool tile floor. He opened the memory map and added a new mark. The day I was called son without having to earn it. He thought to himself, I wish I knew how to keep things like this forever. There was no soundtrack, no perfect ending, but something had begun to grow, like light slipping through a cracked door, a little more each day and no one could stop it. After that unexpected hug from his mother and the quiet nod from a father who had never known how to apologize, Oren thought maybe things had begun to change. That day, the kitchen felt a little more peaceful. Sunlight spilled across the scarred wooden table like something just beginning to bloom. Not whole yet, but warm enough to touch the heart. Alba took a longer nap than usual. She said, maybe yesterday was just a bit too much. Oren didn't press. The next morning, the sky was a brilliant blue. A breeze swept in from the avenue, carrying a faint scent of milkwood blossoms from a park across the city. "Grandma, would you like to go out for a bit today?" Oren asked, hesitating. Alba nodded right away. "If it's the park with the bench near the pond and the pigeon nest, I'm always ready." Oren quickly packed a small picnic. Sandwiches, sliced red apples, a few bags of mint tea, and the faded checkered cloth Alba used to carry on late afternoons long ago. She saw it and smiled. "You still remember?" The park hadn't changed much, only Oren had grown up, and Alba, in a way, had grown smaller. Not in size, but in step. Slower, lighter, as fragile as a leaf waiting for the fall. They sat on the same old bench beneath the tall maple tree. The pigeons were still there, unsuspecting that the woman who once scolded Oren for chasing them was now sitting quietly beneath the golden sun. "Do you remember the day I fell into the pond?" Oren asked as he poured tea. "I do," Alba chuckled. "You screamed, 'Save me, Grandma,' but wouldn't let go of the cookie tin. I was soaked like a drowned rat and you cried because your cookies melted." They laughed. Light, like the breeze, but deep, like the roots beneath the tree. A moment of true peace. No apologies, no regrets. Just a present so simple it could have been framed and carried through a lifetime. Oren cut the sandwiches into small pieces. "I thought this might be easier for you to eat." "First picnic you've ever made for me," Alba said, chewing slowly, her eyes glistening but smiling still. Then, suddenly, a cough. At first, it was soft. Oren was still pouring tea, but the cough didn't stop. It grew harsher, sharper, like someone ripping a piece of cloth from deep inside her chest. Oren spun around. "Grandma!" Alba doubled over, coughing violently. Her hands trembled as she reached for a handkerchief. In her pocket, a beat of silence. Then Oren saw it. Blood. Bright red. Not a faded stain, but fresh. Flowing. No. No, this can't. He lunged forward, catching her by the shoulders. She tried to wave him off gently. It's okay. I'm okay. Okay? Oren's voice cracked. I'm calling. An ambulance. Right now. Don't. She exhaled between breaths. Today is a beautiful day. Don't turn it into one filled with sirens and needles. You knew, didn't you? Since this morning. Oren's throat tightened. You felt it, and you still came. Alba squeezed his hand. I just wanted, if this were my last meal, for it to have sun, wind, and your eyes looking at me. Like this. Oren had no words. He only held her tighter. I don't want just this. It's not just this, she whispered. It's everything. It's more than any of the years I spent in a place where no one even said my name. Oren gripped her hand harder. The bloodied handkerchief slipped from her lap and landed on the grass. A lone pigeon fluttered down beside them, tilting its head as if it, too, understood. The most beautiful things don't last. The sun kept shining. The tea went cold, and the checkered cloth, now stained with blood, rested beside a half-eaten sandwich, quiet and still. They arrived at the hospital with the siren wailing through the gridlocked Bronx afternoon. The shadows of tall buildings stretched longer, casting over Oren's face a chill he couldn't quite name. He sat in the back seat, gripping Alba's hand, her skin growing colder, but she squeezed back faintly as if to remind him. It's okay. I'm still here. But her lips only moved. She didn't have the strength to speak. The bloodied handkerchief in Oren's hand had gone cold. And fear, true, raw fear, had never looked so real. Emergency room. Pulmonary unit. Bronx General Hospital. Pale neon lights. The sharp smell of antiseptics, anesthetics, and the steady rhythm of machines created a space where everyone had to learn the language of fragility. A young doctor stepped out, hollow-eyed, glasses sliding down his nose, holding a set of scans like a verdict. Severe pleural effusion. She missed the window for early intervention. If she doesn't undergo surgery within 24 hours, I'm sorry. How much? Oren asked, almost instinctively. At least $185,000 for the operation, excluding post-op care, and we're not sure she'll stay conscious long enough for the surgical team to prep. Oren's vision blurred. You mean, just because she doesn't have the money, He couldn't finish. Then, sharp footsteps echoed through the corridor. Calum Varel. No announcement, no permission. He walked straight into the hallway, flanked by 2 private physicians and a legal aide. In his hand, a navy blue folder stamped, with the crest of an international hospital in Geneva. I've arranged everything. Once this is signed, the emergency response team will transfer her to the intensive care unit. I'll cover the costs. Not for my reputation. This is the one thing I can finally do right. Oren looked up. He wasn't surprised, but this time there was no resistance in his eyes, just the quiet torment of someone caught between love and survival. You're really going to pay for it. It's not payment, Calum said, meeting his gaze. It's restitution. For the woman who raised my son while I believed a nanny could substitute a mother. Oren said nothing. He slowly reached into his backpack. He pulled out the familiar, Wooden box. Opened the lid. Took out an old photograph. Alba holding a 4-year-old Oren, the little boy clinging to her neck, face buried in her shoulder like she was the only safe place in the world. He placed the photo on the signing table. If you're going to sign, look at this first, not just to authorize treatment, but to acknowledge that she is part of this family. Calum looked. He pulled out his pen. No hesitation. He signed. Firm, fast, no conditions attached. She wasn't just the help, he said. She's a part of our memory, something we left behind. Oren squeezed his father's hand. For the first time, not out of anger, but because he knew now, he couldn't save her alone. I don't want her to live because we have money. Want her to live because now this family knows what she's worth. Calum nodded. And I just hope it's not too late for me to learn how to love right. Moments later, as nurses wheeled Alba toward the critical care unit, Oren walked. Beside her, holding her hand, Leontine arrived soon after. No makeup, no heels, just the old knitted scarf Alba had made for Aaron when he was 8. She gently draped it over Alba's legs, like stitching together a thread that had never truly been tied. As the surgical doors swung closed, Oren paused, turned, to face his parents. She once told me, real love doesn't save people from dying, but it helps them live more fully before they go. Calum placed a hand on his son's shoulder. No words, just a look. And for the first time, that look didn't demand, didn't command. It simply learned how to say, I was wrong. The surgery lasted 4 hours. With every passing minute, Oren paced the hallway, sometimes slumped in a plastic chair, sometimes standing just to check the time again. Sweat soaked the collar of his shirt, and he clutched the wooden box as if it were the only thing anchoring him to what was real. Like if he let go, she and everything that made a family feel true would vanish. Calum sat quietly in a corner. No phone, no laptop, just staring into the empty space ahead, like a man who'd landed in a world where money had no power. Leontine had left. Without a word, Oren assumed she had turned her back again, like all the times before. But nearly. An hour later, she returned. In her hands, an old paper bag, a thin stack of books, and something neither Oren nor Calum expected. Oren's hand-drawn storybook about Alba. It sat on top, the first page curled at the corner, water-stained. From tears, when did you make this? Leontine asked, her voice small as she sat beside Oren. Last night, Oren answered quietly. I didn't know how to say it right, so I told it the way she used to tell me stories. When I was 6. Leontine opened the book. Each page held memories that couldn't be bought. Oren, riding the bus, curled against Alba's back. A little boy crying when she left without saying goodbye. A birthday card that read, You're not the help, you're the heart of me. She paused at the last page. A drawing of Oren, present day, sitting at Alba's bedside, holding her hand. Behind him, 2 simple figures, his parents. No longer turned away, but facing forward, their hands gently resting on their son's shoulders. Leontine closed the book slowly. Her eyes held shame, but this time she didn't try to hide it. She looked like a mother who had just realized someone else had taught her child how to love. Would you want me to go in? She asked. Oren nodded. That was enough. Recovery room. Alba slept. The heart monitor beeped steadily. soft and steady like an old lullaby. Leontine stepped in. The room was dimly lit, machines quietly humming, but her gaze was brighter than any of them. No lipstick, no heels, no title. Just a woman standing before another woman who had mothered her child for years. She sat down across from Alba. Silence. A minute passed. Then, gently, she reached out and held Alba's hand. Her own hand was dry. Alba's was cold. But where they met was the warmest point in the room. "You weren't just the help," Leontine said without raising her voice. "Your memory, the only part of this family that stayed whole, long before I realized what I'd broken." Alba stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened. Slow. Weary, but clear. She saw Leontine. No shock, no fear. Just a smile. Small, but the kind reserved only for family. Leontine began to cry, quietly. Her grip never loosened. Alba closed her eyes again, not from exhaustion, but from peace. Because now she had been seen, remembered, and honored as who she truly was. In the hallway, Oren saw his mother emerge. Her eyes were red, but her shoulders were strong. He didn't ask anything. He just stood and took her hand. "Thank you, Mom," Oren said, for the first time in many, many years. Leontine gently squeezed his hand. "No," she whispered. "I'm the one who should thank you." They stood quietly together. No more distance. No need for anyone to apologize. Because some love is never written in words. It's in the quiet, steady way people finally show up and mean it. They waited in the hospital hallway for over 4 hours, each minute stretched like a year tightening in the chest. Caleb leaned against the wall, eyes half closed, but his fingers kept tapping a slow rhythm against his thigh. For the first time, Leontine took his hand, not as a wife, but as a mother, trying to hold on to the last bit of warmth left in the world. Oren didn't move. He sat upright, eyes fixed on the floor, still clutching the wooden box. No phone, no book, no water, only silence, and the cracks spreading quietly through his chest. "I've counted 738 tiles on this hallway floor. One of them is chipped. And there's a faint child's footprint near the corner wall." He didn't say it out loud, just whispered it in his mind, like those small forgotten details might somehow keep her life from slipping away. Behind that door. The door swung open. The lead surgeon stepped out, his face pale, sweat beading along his forehead. "We did everything we could, but..." He didn't need to finish. The hallway fell still. Oren stood up. He didn't scream. He didn't collapse. He just walked slowly into the room, like a soldier crossing a battlefield, already knowing there would be no one left on the other side. Alba lay there, blanket pulled up to her chest, her face peaceful. No oxygen tubes, no beeping machines, only the kind of stillness she'd never been allowed in life. Oren pulled a chair close. He sat down, placed his hand over hers, cold now, the same hand he used to grip tightly when he was sick, when he was scared, when the nightmares came and she was the only one who stayed. "Grandma, I'm not going to cry today," he whispered, voice trembling, "because you lived with truth, because you taught me how to love, how to remember, how to hold on to something the world keeps dropping, kindness." He bowed his head. There was no sobbing, only quiet tears falling onto her hand like nighttime rain on an old roof. 2 hours later, Caleb entered the room. He stood silently, watching his son sit motionless by the bed of the woman who had raised him, not with paychecks, but with love. Oren didn't look up, but he reached for the wooden box, opened it, and pulled out a stack of old letters, written by Alba, ever since he first learned to read. No grand speeches, no life lessons, just simple truths. If you're ever afraid of the dark, remember, my voice telling stories. If you feel lost, look at your hands. They were once held by the whole world. If you ever forget who you are, just remember, you're the one I loved most. No reason needed. Oren placed the letters into his father's hands. His eyes were red, but no longer angry. Read them, then ask yourself this. Have you ever loved anyone? Without using money? Caleb took the letters. His hands trembled slightly. For the first time, the man who'd stood in front of hundreds of CEOs had no words for the handwriting of a woman who was now gone. Oren kissed Alba's forehead. I'm sorry for not saying, I love you, one more time. But I won't let what you taught me disappear. He stood. Before leaving the room, he turned to his parents. He didn't blame them. He didn't accuse. He just said the one thing this family had needed to hear for far too long. Family doesn't have to be perfect to be real. Outside, the rain had begun to fall, but no one reached for an umbrella. Because sometimes we need to get soaked, just to remember we're still alive, to keep loving for the ones who no longer can. 1 year later, autumn had returned to New York. Golden leaves blanketed the entrance of the old apartment complex in the South Bronx, a place now devoid of bustling traffic, opulent mansions, or lavish parties, yet still resonant with the laughter of children each afternoon. On the 3rd floor, the modest apartment to the left, once the setting of Oren and Alba's first shared, slightly burnt soup, had transformed into a classroom. No flashy signs, no advertisements, just a simple wooden plaque hanging on the cracked plaster wall, bearing the hand-painted words, Rosario reads, "Read to remember, to live, to know you've been loved." Beneath the sign sat an old wooden chair, Alba's chair. Unrefurbished, its scratches and the small crack on the backrest remained, the very spot where she used to place a cloth for comfort. Positioned at the center of the room, the chair remained, unoccupied, serving as a quiet beacon, illuminating the eager faces of children as they read aloud, their eyes wide with wonder. Oren stood at the back of the class. He appeared leaner, his hair neatly trimmed, dressed simply in a gray linen shirt. In his hands he held a small book, Charlotte's Web, the same story Alba had once read to him before he could spell. Today, we'll read chapter 6, Oren said, with a gentle smile. But first, does anyone recall what Ms. Maya Angelou said? A curly-haired girl stood up excitedly and recited, "People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." The class erupted in applause, uneven but heartfelt. Seated in a corner, Leontine sketched illustrations for new reading materials. Her pen no longer signed contracts but now drew hearts, flowers, and a gentle-faced elderly woman smiling under a wooden porch. Caleb never visited the class. Yet, each month, a donation arrived from the VR Foundation. Few knew its origin, but Oren understood. His father had learned to give without seeking recognition. At the back of the room hung a smaller wooden plaque engraved with a quote in both English and Spanish, the lullaby Alba used to whisper to Oren at bedtime. People will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Beneath the quote was the only photograph of Alba and young Oren together. They sat on a park bench, a book open between them. Oren surveyed the room. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting a glow on the empty chair in the center. Alba's wooden chair. He approached it, resting his hand on its back. Grandma, today we welcomed 3 new kids. They can't read yet, but their smiles are just like yours used to be. No response came. Yet, a gentle breeze stirred the curtain as if a hand had softly brushed his hair. Oren looked up. He smiled. She was gone. But the love she left behind continued to narrate its story. Every day, with every child, teaching each heart once lost or commodified to love again, not through wealth, but through presence. Some depart without leaving an inheritance, but they impart a love that remains unforgettable. If this story touched you, please share the line that resonated most and subscribe to our channel to help spread the kindness that still lingers in this world. Thank you for accompanying Oren and Alba to the very end.